All right, so the topic that we will be exploring today is how to teach skills and strategies that will help in the summarizing process. Looking at the relevance, the ability to summarize a piece of text is a lifelong skill that is utilized not only in elementary education, but throughout the entirety of life. By explicitly teaching students meaningful skills and strategies that will help them to summarize, we are helping them on the trajectory towards success. The sooner we implement the use of summarization strategies, the better chance students have to succeed and remain on track with the outlined ministry curricular goals. So, just as a little reflection piece before we begin, I want you to think of a time in your adult life where you were required to identify the main idea of a piece of text outside of a school setting. So, outside of maybe post secondary or even high school. Yeah, just outside of the school setting, when have you had to summarize a piece of text? Give you a few more seconds to just think. So, for me personally, Um, I know that many times in my job, I've had to summarize pieces of text, whether that is a standard operations of procedure, whether that is an email, finding the main idea within an email. There are many examples of this, and I'm sure you are all able to come up with examples as well. So, the professional goals that are going to be met through research in this webinar are identifying useful skills and strategies for summarizing texts, identify useful skills needed for summarizing text specifically for students with exceptionalities, identify which grade summarization skills and strategies are introduced and the best way to introduce them, and find interactive resources that teach students the skills and strategies needed for summarizing. So, when exactly should the process of summarizing be introduced? According to the Ontario Language Curriculum, the process of summarizing pieces of text should be introduced as early as grade 1. As per the scaffolding approach, students should begin by learning how to identify important information, including the main idea, and progress towards ordering important details in sequence. So, what I've done is I've just gone to the Ontario Language Curriculum and I have chosen the compare grades hyperlink. And you can see here um, that under the specific expectation C2.6, in grade 1, students are really only focusing on the main idea in a simple piece of text, but in both grade 2 and 3, they progress towards trying to order important details into a sequence. And obviously, this progresses in the older junior grades as well. So, how should the topic be introduced? We know when, but how exactly should we go about bringing up this topic in our classroom? All research conducted before putting together this webinar identifies that the best and most effective way to explicitly teach summarization skills and strategies is through small group intervention. This allows for more one-on-one direction and allows the educator to monitor progress and highlight areas that need improvement. With that being said, though, research indicates that modeling how to summarize a piece of text is extremely effective. Doing this in a large group setting can set the foundation before working in small groups and would ultimately be time efficient. A great way to go about this is during whole group read aloud time, utilizing a visual such as maybe an anchor chart to model. Ultimately, based on combined research from multiple resources, the most effective way to introduce the topic of summarizing is to first model with the class as a whole and then proceed further by teaching specific strategies in leveled intervention groups. So, based on my research, these are the skills and strategies that should be explicitly taught to students beginning in grade 1. First and foremost, though, always utilize strategies that fit the needs of your specific student. These strategies are not one size fits all, and what may work best for some may not work for everybody. So, the most common um, skill or strategy that I came across in my research was to utilize Anchor charts. These include the BME anchor chart, the SWBST anchor chart, story maps, and the 5 Ws and H anchor chart. And then in specific research studies, I found a mapping-based strategy accompanied by flipped learning, as well as the macro rules of summarization. So diving in a little deeper to anchor charts, an anchor chart is a great way to visually show students how to organize key pieces of information within a story. When first introduced, anchor charts should be completed or co-created as a class so that students understand how to use them. They should then be posted somewhere within the class so that students can always refer back to them. Once students have the hang of how to fill these different organizational structures out, the charts can be turned into individual worksheets for students to practice finding key pieces of information within a text, whether this be used during small groups, with a partner, on their own, etc. There are many different types of charts that can be utilized, yet they all seem to focus on pulling out the key pieces of information in a sequenced approach. Choose what works best for your students always, though. If your students do become really confident, have them create their own organizational structure to store key pieces of information rather than providing one. So I know this is in the curriculum as grades progress as well. Having students formulate their own ideas and store them in an organizational structure that they have created, because this just deepens their understanding of the key pieces of information that they're actually looking for in a piece of text. So we're going to dive in a little bit deeper, even looking at specific types of anchor charts or organizational structures. So here I have a picture of the BME, which is the beginning, middle, and end. So this is an anchor chart highlighting the BME, which allows students to organize and identify key events that occurred in the beginning, the middle, and end of a story. Not only does this anchor chart allow students to develop the skill of identifying the main idea of different smaller sections of text, but it allows them to sequence events, which is part of the scaffolding approach outlined in the Ontario curriculum. So as you can see, it asks questions like what important events happen at the beginning of the story, what important events happen in the middle of the story, and how does the story end, breaking the story into smaller pieces that are more manageable for students just learning how to summarize. Then we have the SWBST chart, which is somebody wanted, but so then. So this chart provides students with an acronym to prompt them in identifying key events of a story. This type of chart prompts students to identify who the story is about, what the character or characters wanted, what the problem was, how the character or characters attempted to solve the problem, and how the story ended. Students can then combine their responses to these questions to form an adequate summary of the story. By practicing identifying key pieces of information outlined by these prompts, students are building their understanding of what type of information is actually considered important. So as you can see on the left-hand side of this image, you have the different letters. So somebody is asking who the story is about. Wanted is what did the main character want. But is what is the problem. So is how does the main character try to solve the problem. And then is how does the story end. So if they can remember this acronym, they can use it later on as they progress in the scaffolding approach to remember what pieces of information they should be pulling out from a piece of text. Then we have the story map. So a story map allows the students to identify all key elements within a story. This includes the characters, setting, problem, plot, and solution. Since it does include the elements, this type of chart supports the scaffolding approach as well, as the elements are sequenced and more information is required, as outlined by the curriculum, as students progress. Although this can be constructed with the class, this type of chart is more useful to students who already have some experience with summarizing. Once again, the information provided in this chart can be combined to form a detailed summary of the story. Lastly, we have the 5 W's and H. So who, what, where, when, why, and how. And this is one that I am even familiar with from my time in elementary education. So this has been around a bit longer than maybe some of the others. But just like the others, this chart allows students to practice pulling key pieces of information out from a piece of text. It prompts students by asking, who is the story about? What are the main events in the story? Where does the story take place? When does the story take place? Why do the main events happen? And how does the story end? Again, this chart follows the scaffolded approach, allowing students to sequence events. It also allows students to combine the information they have identified to create a detailed summary. Something important that I would like to note looking at this picture is that this organizer is actually on a tablet, it appears. So when I was in school, these types of graphic organizers really only existed as paper copies. Now we are seeing them available on different digital devices, which is extremely helpful. One for just saving paper, but also for differentiated instruction and any students who require the use of technology as outlined by IEPs. All right, now I would like to dive into the mapping-based strategy and flipped approach. So this is a specific research study that I came across, and it was found in this study as it was being conducted that not only students in English classrooms struggle with how to summarize, it's actually quite common amongst many different multilingual classrooms. So it was found that this topic also seemed to be quite difficult in the Chinese curriculum, and some researchers provided beneficial insight based on their struggles. Based on previous research, the following approach was taken in this specific study: flipped learning, which implements the use of students' personal time so that class time can be extremely intentional in terms of providing the needed supports. It gave students content to be reviewed before entering the classroom so that the foundational knowledge was already there. And it also used mapping-based strategies, which focuses on using a map or template to organize and structure conceptual information, which is very similar to the use of the anchor charts and organizational structures that we just looked at. The combination of these approaches proved to have highly significant results compared to other students who were taught conventional strategies. So, a dissenting opinion with this is not everyone has the access to resources and or the time needed to explore foundational information outside of school hours. So, do you believe this could be extremely beneficial for students in all subject areas, or is this method overstepping boundaries of a school life balance? So, if you just want to reflect on that question for a minute and think to yourself, is this something you believe in, or does this overstep your boundaries? I think for me personally, that it oversteps boundaries a little bit. I do believe that kids need to be kids and they need their time outside of school to also focus on just their social emotional development. Um, but I do think having extra resources available, if students want to utilize them, that could be beneficial. But really, it's up in the air. Everyone will have their own opinion about this, but I did think this was extremely interesting based on the positive results of the study. Now I would like to look at the macro rules of summarization. So these two researchers proposed the following three rules when learning how to condense information and ultimately summarize a piece of text. They thought that deletion, which any proposition that denotes an accidental property of discourse, may be deleted. They thought that generalization, which is an immediate super concept, may be substituted for a sequence of micro propositions, and that construction, which is a global proposition that denotes normal conditions, components, or consequences, may be substituted for a sequence of propositions that make them explicit, are all three rules that help in the summarizing process. It was found in studies surrounding these macro rules that teaching students the three rules in terms that they can understand helps them to identify what pieces of information are important by extracting the macro structure, which is also known as the gist. These rules are supported in other research as other findings indicate the importance of teaching students how to delete trivial information, delete redundant information, substitute superordinate terms for lists or series of events, etc. So, again, I have another reflection question for you to just think about for a minute. Looking at your own personal education journey, would the deletion or substitution of information help you summarize a piece of text, or would it create more work and lead you towards confusion? So, I'll give you a second to think about that. I think personally for me, again, that this would cause more confusion for me because it would seem like more work. You're having to pull information out or exchange terms in order to understand it better and highlight the gist. Whereas conventional strategies, you're just looking for that main idea. So it seems like an extra step to me, but I understand that is not the case for a lot of people. And this has seemed to work exceptionally well for lots of people out there because it takes away those irrelevant pieces of information and just leaves them with the pieces they need to identify. So, one of my other goals was to figure out how to approach summarization with students who have learning disabilities. So, I did find in my research that some, but most definitely not all, students with learning disabilities relating to reading have less efficient text scanning strategies, less efficient comprehension monitoring strategies, and less sensitivity for text structure. This influences their ability to properly summarize pieces of text. It has been suggested that these students succeed when explicitly taught how to use the three macro rules of summarizing and focus on deletion and superordination. These students can be supported by practicing self-questioning, paraphrasing, and visual imagery when reading. And these students excel when specifically asked to write a sentence summarizing one paragraph at a time, lessening the feeling of being overwhelmed and narrowing in on a specific area of focus. Again, this will be different for every student, but these are good strategies to explore not only for students with learning disabilities relating to reading comprehension, but for all students within the class, which we know as universal design for learning. My last goal was to identify some interactive resources for educators. The main resource that I found extremely useful for both educators and students is IXL.com. So I have screenshots here of what it'll look like and instructions on how to access it. So if you go to IXL.com, go under the Learning tab, select English as your subject, go under Topics, and then select Main Idea, and you will end up looking at this image here on the left. You can see it has different skills to be worked on from grade 2 all the way up to grade 12 that help with summarizing. So on the right hand here, I have selected a grade 3 skill that uses key details to determine the main idea. So basically what this program does is you as the educator can select the skills that students need to work on, assign them to the students, and then they can access this website and the questions you have assigned to them to practice their skills. So I think this is an amazing resource because it can not only guide educators towards how they can help students practice, but it gives students the tool to actually practice themselves. Link down below here, I also just found a few little extra resources, which were some free worksheets and slideshows just for practicing summarizing, and then also some free graphic organizer templates if that's something you would like to utilize in your class. So in summary, summarizing is a lifelong skill that will be utilized in many different aspects of life far beyond elementary education, and therefore it must be explicitly taught. The Ontario Language Curriculum outlines the implementation of summarization in grade 1 with a scaffolding approach being followed. Best practice is to introduce the topic to the class as a whole by modeling with a familiar story, and then progressing further with explicit instruction being done in intervention groups. Graphic organizers and anchor charts are one of the most valuable tools to have students pull out and visualize key pieces of information. Deletion and Superordination, which are the macro rules, have also proven to be effective when summarizing, specifically with students with learning disabilities. And IXL is a great interactive resource for educators, amongst many, many others. So I just wanted to take the time to thank everybody for listening, and I hope this gives you a little more insight on how to help your students when it comes to learning how to summarize pieces of text.